We spoke with EY's Natalie Langley about tax advice for startups. Hi Natalie, thank you very much for joining us. So we're here to talk about tax advice for startups, and given the fact that technology, as we know, is a global industry, what tech-related things do tech entrepreneurs need to know?
So this is one of the crucial areas I find for startup and scale-up businesses, because as you've quite rightly identified, the way the world is at the moment, businesses can be global from day one. It's not like in the old days where you would establish in a home market and then look to expand overseas. So when I'm talking to startup businesses, I often get them to start to think about their journey via their customer base, and then how they support their customers and what that means for the structure of the business and where employees are based. So thinking about it from a tax perspective, if you look to your first customer or second customer and they're based overseas, the kind of things that tech businesses need to think about are what is the service or good or offering that I'm providing to that customer? How am I going about providing it? Is it remote and cloud-based, or do I actually need people on the ground that are going to be servicing that particular business? And then how am I going to be paid for it, and what's the nature of the money that's coming back to me? And the reason those things are really important is that from a tax perspective, where you've got cross-border transactions between companies and their customers, they need to be aware of things like withholding taxes, which means that where overseas customers are paying for software or a license or something of that nature, there may be a local requirement to withhold taxes before the payment's made. And for startup businesses, that can often be quite damaging if they're expecting to get 100% of the sales revenue and then they suddenly find they've only got 80% in the bank account. So that's the first piece. The second piece is then around, there's a bit of a spiral I find with businesses that after they get that first global contract, they then find that they need to get more and more embedded into that particular jurisdiction. So that question around how you service those companies is really important, because if you need people on the ground over there, you very quickly need to think about things like immigration, whether you're going to be hiring people locally, whether you're going to be taking on a third party in that particular jurisdiction to help support the contract, and how you're going to manage that from your tax reporting and compliance perspective. So one thing that can trip up startup companies a lot is that even if someone is a UK employee, so an employee with a UK employment contract, if they're physically performing services overseas, then there's a good chance that you're into local jurisdiction rules around payroll taxes, social security, and it's your company's obligation to deal with that in that foreign territory. So that's really important. From there, again, the spiral tends to develop that companies then say, well, we think we need a local presence in that jurisdiction. And so the questions that you then need to ask yourself are, what's the type of entity that I can use over there? How can I get it set up? How does that then interact with the rest of my structure? So for example, where is my intellectual property based, and how is that company overseas servicing the customer with my intellectual property? And that's where we get into the exciting world of transfer pricing and things like that, which I think is a really good opportunity for companies to take a step back and look at their global issues and work out really the basics of who do I have in the business, where are they based, and what function are they performing. And it doesn't need to be more complicated than that, but it gives businesses a really good basis for thinking about how they're going to manage their global reporting requirements due to having that international aspect very early on. For other businesses, there can be specific issues. So when I'm talking to e-commerce businesses, for example, and we look at the global aspect, supply chain is really, really important. And indirect taxes and VAT and customs can be really quite complicated for some of those businesses. And so one of the things I would recommend is to get clear very early on what the physical route of your supply chain looks like, but also the contractual route of your supply chain. So which entities are dealing with customers, which entities are buying in stock. And once you've got a handle on that, you can then begin to build out the technical analysis of how you deal with it. So where a lot of companies will trip up is UK companies who are selling goods overseas won't necessarily realise that they may have obligations to register for VAT in other jurisdictions and apply local rates of VAT rather than UK rates of VAT. This has also been slightly complicated by changes to US tax law that's coming through at the moment. So US sales tax is going through a bit of an evolution at the moment, and it means that businesses in the UK that are selling goods and services into the US may now have more reporting obligations under US sales tax rules than they had previously. So that can be quite challenging to manage for businesses that are perhaps still in very early startup phase.
So you've touched on some of the issues already, but what other challenges are tech entrepreneurs coming up against when it comes to tax and regulation?
I think every time I talk to entrepreneurs and when we meet at events, and I always ask that question because it's always nice to know what's on the mind of entrepreneurs. And in some ways it doesn't change. One of the key issues that still comes up time and time again is attracting the right employees to the business and making sure that they can be rewarded in such a way that is appropriate to keep them there and incentivise them. So in some senses that's a wider issue than just tax, because you want to make sure that the people you're bringing in are the right cultural fit, and businesses, or particularly entrepreneurial businesses, need to make sure that when they're bringing those people in, which can often be very fast and very quick, that they're doing it in such a way that they are able to explain the vision of the business and really embed those people in the culture. And that way, hopefully it's a virtuous cycle that they can then attract more people who can help to grow the business. But from a tax angle, we still see a lot of businesses using share incentivisation to attract the right kind of employees, and in some ways it's an expectation out there in tech businesses now that the employees that are coming on will get share options in the business. And so it's important for companies to think about that early on, make sure that they're implementing the right kind of reward strategies, but also communicating it properly to the employees. So, for example, the Enterprise Management Incentive Share Plan is a great tax efficient way for businesses that don't have a lot of money to reward their employees with share options. But I really encourage businesses to explain it better to their employees and talk to them about what it means to them and why they're receiving it. And that way you can kind of better align the objectives of the employee that's coming in with the objectives of the business, rather than it just being a bit of a transaction in terms of giving people options. So I think globalisation, as we talked about before, is the other major challenge, and how you manage that. And businesses, entrepreneurial businesses, need to move very fast and need to be agile. We often hear the word agile in these types of businesses. So we appreciate the need to get out there and explore those new markets and take people on very quickly. But as an accountant, I often encourage the businesses, to take a step back and look at what they're doing, and also try not to operate in silos. So you may have the commercial team going out and signing up customers and perhaps even forming new entities in other jurisdictions, without the finance team necessarily being able to step in at the right time. So the more businesses can look holistically at what the commercial strategy means for the tax and legal structure, the earlier on that they can do that, the less likely they are to either get themselves into difficulties in other jurisdictions or have to go back and revisit things and move things around.
Yeah, because ultimately tech founders and entrepreneurs need to ensure that their businesses are running smoothly at home before they embark on trying to launch in a new territory.
And that's hugely challenging, and entrepreneurs have often said to me, again going back to the culture point, that not only do you have to keep control of that business at home, but quite often in order to, when you're looking at an expansion into say the US, because you have quite a large geographical distance, you may need senior members of that management team to move abroad for a period of time. And that can be immensely challenging for a business, and often you see it working quite well where you have co-founders and they can split the responsibilities for that kind of thing. Again, to bring it back to tax, if you've got people moving over to the US for a long period, you absolutely need to think about immigration and the tax consequences of it, because I quite often see conversations where they're saying, well, the CEO's spent 3 months in the US this year, just going back and forth, and you kind of go, okay, let's take a step back and figure out what that means then for his own or her own personal tax situation and the obligations of the business. But also in that you raise an absolutely valid point, because there are so many other bits and pieces that can cause businesses to take their eye off the ball a little bit. And the other one that always comes up is fundraising. So when companies are going through a big fundraising round, often it's a huge time commitment for the senior members of the management team and other people in the business who are pulling together the projections and the business plans and things like that. And so I guess one piece of advice there is that if you are going into a fundraising round, you need to go in with your eyes open and not think that this is something that can be done as a kind of, few hours in the the evening as an add-on to the day job, because every entrepreneur I've talked to has always said that took a lot more time and effort than I expected it to. So it's worth bearing that in mind when you're planning on the ongoing running of the business.
So we recently had the budget announcement here in the UK. Are there any changes that tech entrepreneurs need to be aware of?
So there's a couple of interesting things that came out of the budget. The first one is a bit of a bigger picture and indicates direction of travel for taxation of digital companies. And that's the consultation, the introduction around the digital services tax. I think this is going to be something that goes on and on for the next few years, because we've seen different proposals from the OECD, from the EU and from HMRC, and HMRC and government are now taking the initiative to introduce a UK specific one. But at the moment it's the way it's written is it's going to affect the larger businesses. But I think it is really important for startups and scale-ups to be aware of it, because at the moment we're still dealing with tax legislation that was written many years ago in an entirely different world. And things do need to change, because the way businesses are run these days is entirely different to when those rules were first put in place. So that's one to watch out for, and I think that's going to change over the coming years. The two specific changes that may affect startups were around entrepreneurs relief. So for entrepreneurs relief, there's been changes to the definition of personal companies on who qualifies for entrepreneurs relief on a sale of the business. So that's something for entrepreneurs to think about when they're looking at both transactions that might dilute their shareholding, or if they've got a potential exit coming up anytime soon. And the other one is again a consultation with the view that in 2020 the rules on R&D tax credits are going to change slightly. And again, it's a small change, but it will be interesting to see how many businesses it affects in practice, because what's going to happen is that the repayable R&D tax credit, which, as we know, so many of our entrepreneurial businesses rely on, is going to be capped, or it's proposed that it's going to be capped at 3 times the PAYE and national insurance bill of the particular company. So where I can see potential, a bit of thinking behind that, is for businesses where they have a lot of outsourced R&D. So where they have people who are not necessarily employees of the company, but they've outsourced R&D development, and they may have a very skeleton crew of people actually employed by the business, and therefore a lower PAYE bill. So in situations like that, as I say, not coming in till 2020, but something to keep an eye on, and certainly something that I'm talking to the companies that I know a lot about at the moment.
Last but not least, what advice would you give to tech entrepreneurs when it comes to tax and company structuring?
So I think it's really important to talk to people. That's the main thing, because the businesses that I work with get so much great advice and support from their peer group, first of all, around businesses that are maybe 6-12 months further down the line, who have encountered these challenges and may have advice on how they can manage them themselves. When it comes to the structure, and particularly around international stuff, I would say just think about it. Keep it front of mind. Always needs to be the commercial aspect of the business. But whenever you're looking at new territories, think about what it means to your structure. Think about where employees are based. As tax people, we still get really concentrated on where people are physically performing duties, which is sometimes a bit weird to explain to tech businesses, because everything can be done remotely these days. And so it's difficult that we sometimes feel that we're labouring the point with them. But it quite often drives the tax consequences of what's going on. So track your employees, work out where they're spending their time, think about what services that they're providing to your customers while they're doing it. And then come and talk to your peer groups, talk to other people in the profession, because we're always happy to sit down and just think about what it means for your business, and give a little bit of the benefit of what we've seen with other companies. So yeah, just talk, keep talking, and I'm sure you get to the right place.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.